Aaron, how are you doing?
Hey Kyle, I'm okay. How are you?
Very good. Good to see you.
Good to see
Um,
you.
yeah, so let's see, the last time that we met, we were talking about our device that we were working with. After going through this process and making the device and even like sending it to render and watching it kind of in action, there's thing kind of came to the forefront of me of the question of, is this actually some type of weapon that we've actually made as opposed to some type of device that like sends communication? Because in our engagement and in our process of working together side by side, we went through this like really interesting process of analyzing the idea of intimacy and foreign objects and working on communication devices that bridge those gaps. And then we kind of arrived at this point, and now I'm just kind of wondering, um, how do we calibrate the language to make sure it doesn't look like a device of war or a weapon device, and more of something that actually is a tool for engagement and a tool for like broadcast, right?
Yeah, I think this is a very good point, Kyle. And the device, the catapult, has always been used in warfare, like not modern warfare, but it has always been used to project something at the enemy. Now, with our object that we've both came up with and agreed upon, and we've worked with this for these past couple of weeks.
Mhm.
I think that this object itself is a rather absurd object to be a weapon. It's for the simple reason that it shoots things at both sides. So it would never work as a weapon unless you're surrounded by enemies on both sides. But
Good point.
however, in the realm that we're working in, I think this tool or this object that we're creating is more representative of metaphors and how this whole object as a whole and parts of it are stand out as metaphors instead of it being a weapon.
Mhm.
So I think we're safe from that perspective, from that aspect of it,
Okay.
because it is also a funny thing, even if it's when you've put movement into it, it looks like a funny object.
It
So
does. It has like a funny spring bounce to it,
yes, yes. So I think we should focus on that and identify and and locate these metaphors, and I think these metaphors and these meanings to this object would spring out, pun intended. Um,
I see what you did there. That's good.
so I think we're safe from that. Even the way you've rendered it, it looks like a game, a role-playing game from the early 2000s, like a
Mm,
medieval
right.
thing, but it's a game, since it exists in the realm of art and contemporary art and visual art. I think we're safe from that because and I've noticed that um, on the flags, I'm calling them the flags or the pieces of
Oh yeah.
fabric. You've you've added the flames, but that could also be the holder of messages, or so we can play around these lines, and so yeah, I think this is, I initially I had started this with, instead of having the rocks, having people like on
Right.
that having a conversation, but then when the connection is lost, they are, and the connection, by the connection I mean the thing holding them together, they are projected apart. So since we started off with that idea, that they are held together on a string, and then they are lifted off apart, I think that is already enough material and
Right.
enough meanings for us to build on that as a metaphor and not a weapon.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a really good point. And yeah, because like right now, I guess at least what we're looking at, I kind of always assume that these are more or less just placeholders for something until we figure out like what goes in there. And then also at the same time too, I don't think we've really talked much about like, do we have like multiple things, like do we launch a whole bunch of things together? Do we like, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity to think about like, it's not just like one thing that we're working with. We can think about launching people, we can think about launching messages, we can thinking about like things tethered to other objects too. Like the one thing that I liked about this weird format was like the way that the flag kind of like carries with it in this like tethered composition, and then it kind of like tumbles to the ground at a certain point, and it's just kind of always kept there. But I, like you were mentioning, I really like the idea of using that to maybe like send words or send messages or send communication. So like it kind of reinforces the idea that there's like a sense of broadcast here, almost like a radio unit or something that allows you to send and receive.
Mhm.
Oh, speaking of, did you send the I have not received the letter, by the way, but I'm eagerly awaiting, and I know it will get here soon, but I'm excited to like think about that as a component of this as well.
Yes, yes. I think this exercise. So I think 2 weeks ago we've agreed that we start this exercise of sending a letter. So the lightest object, so it isn't costly, and it's like a letter or some form of something written on paper within an envelope with the slowest means possible, or the, at least from my end, from Malta, it was like I the it's an unregistered mail,
Hmm.
and this option said it would be there in around 5 days. So under normal circumstances, this would have arrived within 5 days.
Right.
So this is very, very interesting to see when we resort to more basic forms and uh, indirect forms of communication. We can see the time that passes between one letter and another. So I think it's nice that we launched this initiative in parallel to this project. Well, I'm not sure where this will go,
Hmm.
as maybe only form of documentation,
Hmm.
or but I think this would give us insight on something else, or also insight on how people would have communicated pre-internet.
Right. Right.
So
Great.
this because I think we are beyond that, yourself and myself, because we don't know how to communicate with letters. At least that's not really, I've never really experienced that um, so far. I never really experienced that. So I think that would also give us insight on that, even if it's not for the project, but we would it would give us something. At least we would learn something.
I agree. I totally agree. I'm trying to think of the last time I actually tried to mail a letter to somebody. Like I've mailed things to people, like packages and stuff, but like mailing a letter, it just seems so. You said the word before you said before the internet, and I was like, oh yeah, there was a before the internet. Because you and I are like in the age where like we were there before the internet, and we were there when the internet started. We actually saw that transition, but it's like all of my students I have are like they grew up, like they were born after the internet already started, and it's like, wow, it's so crazy to think that like the world is just automatically so different. You have no idea like the perception of what it's like without that tool. It's
Yes.
kind of crazy.
Yeah. So
um
I think this, in this way, in this form of communicating, so we're communicating here. However, we're trying to also communicate with these letter and mail.
right.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. I think it's also exciting, like to know when you would receive it and when you would send it back and how long it would take.
Right.
So I think it's also an interesting tangent to our process.
Yeah, I really want to. I'm really curious about it because I really would love to figure out a way to how both projects link together. And I don't want to force it, but I just wonder if there's like I don't know, maybe I'll try to figure out when I get the letter and read it and do something to it and send it back to you. Maybe I'll try to just make an attempt of figuring out something digital that I could put into this digital device that somehow links it. And maybe each time it goes back and forth between us, we can figure out like something that can try to like come into this space or something that tries to bridge the gap. And again, like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But since it's digital, we can like put it in and see if it looks. If it doesn't work out, just take it out, you know.
Oh.
So look, I don't know how you feel, but I've just been kind of writing down notes about maybe things that we should be considering in the future as far like how we actually kind of start wrapping up things like that. And just things that I'm kind of remembering back from our earlier conversations is one thing that we never really totally solved, or that was like a really fun, interesting metaphor, was the idea of like the spring, the invisible spring, and if there should be something there. It seems like there's potential for that. Another thing was the idea of like, is there anything at the center of this catapult, or is there a reason why they're like almost like magnets, like propelling away from one another? Another question is like how many or what devices come in that are actually getting launched away. And like you were talking about earlier, the idea of people, like it's actually pretty easy just to take a 3D model of a person and throw it in there and like, let's just try that and see what works. So like maybe for next time I can try to have something like that ready. So we can just visualize what it looks like to throw some other stuff out there, you know? And then the other last thing, oh, I'm sorry, there's two more things. So one would be the presentation of how this all works. Like, you know, is it a video? Is it incorporated into something else physical? And then the last thing, this is, at least is what I can think of off the top of my head, is can the physical letter, or does the physical letter that we're sending back and forth somehow get incorporated? And again, these aren't questions that I think we need to answer necessarily right now, but just for me, just kind of like in my periphery to think about, you know, how we would fine tune stuff towards the end of this. I don't know if there's anything that you are still really like questioning, or you really want to know more about or figure out that's driving you crazy that's not in that list.
No, I'm curious. The second point you mentioned was, is there anything at the center? What do you mean at the center?
Oh, I think like I think before we actually like visualized and made this, and we were just conceptually talking about the idea of something launching away from each other. I think I was thinking about the idea of like, is there like, if it's always doing this, it's almost like magnets that are like polar opposites that can never touch, you know? And I was just wondering if there's like something, can you see my cursor? So like literally, does something exist here, metaphorical, that like, you know, prevents these things from ever like coming together or something like that? And I don't think that that's necessary whatsoever. I was just like thinking about the potentials of like things that can come into the space or not. It almost kind of goes along with the idea of the spring concept, right? Like the fact that there's nothing here, but it still operates. So there's something really uncanny about how this whole device works, because it's not 100% mechanical to real life. It has the physics of like the real life, but it doesn't have like the actual mechanical devices operating, which I personally like.
No, I think my initial drawing was had something. Let me just sketch it real quick.
Yeah, because I think you had a spring. You had big springs in there, from what I remember.
I had big springs, but let me show you really quickly.
Wait, hang on. I'm going to stop sharing for a second just so I can see it better. Okay. Yeah. Oh.
So this
Okay.
was the catapult, like the first version.
Right.
So there are the catapults here and here.
Mm-hmm.
There are the springs, and there was this line holding them together.
Mm, interesting.
And when one would cut the line, both of them would shoot apart.
Oh,
So,
fascinating.
so I think that was like the metaphor when it had that format.
I
So, and
see.
this line, this lifeline we have right now is like the internet.
Right. Interesting.
So, and as I was like playing around with words, and I was like doing I don't know, exercises with playing with one line and lifeline,
All right.
and so that brought up the importance of this line, because even if one would do this mechanically, if you would tension two springs and you would
Mhm.
hold both ends with a line and then snap it off, it would trigger them.
I wonder.
So
Okay.
so this is what I saw, and this line is is a metaphor for the connection that we have right now. And
Right.
if it's when it's cut, we are both apart in our two different countries,
Hmm.
but this line that it's holding us together is keeping us close. The modification that we've done to the catapult is that we're holding us closer together, like facing each other, the two bowls facing each other,
Right.
which makes more sense for conversation, like people
Hmm.
looking at each other. Um, but you're right. This line in between, this something in the middle, there's something in the center. I think it's something interesting to identify, and I
Yeah.
think something in the center is the thing that holds the catapult
Mm.
from uh, from sending both parties apart.
Right. I really, in hearing you talk about this, I'm really curious about like maybe for next week, not only can I try to put some more devices, but I'm wondering if I can like tether them together somehow to see if I can build that line, because I'm really curious. Even if we decide to take it out at any point, I'd be really. It seems like a very interesting, strong device of this whole composition, and I like that idea. So maybe it'd be fun just to see if we can actually quote unquote digitally physically make that work.
Okay, so
Just to
we
see.
are you proposing we should think in terms of what the line is, what um, this thing is that holding the two things together?
Yeah, I think we should both think about that like conceptually. And then what I would like to do is like I'll try to actually in that software build a chord to see if I can make that happen to where, like there's something that holds it together just at a moment.
Mhm.
But I think, like just doing that virtually doesn't really, for me, it's just like the starting point. I think like you're saying, it's more about like conceptually or metaphorically what that is. Um, and then that might actually help us like figure out like the aesthetic of like what we want it to look or like how we want it to function.
Mhm.
um so I like that. I think that's a really fascinating. I also think so again, like I also think if there's any things that you want to see conceptually being launched apart, we should try it too. Like I want to
Okay.
try just like I'll see if I can find like a basic model of a person to see what that looks like, just because I really am curious to see what that looks like. um so like if there's like a list of things that you are curious about, there's tons of free models out there that we can literally just download and install in there and just see what happens, kind of thing.
Okay.
And then yeah, and then on top of that, there's also the idea of like, do we tether things to them, like in the flags that we're talking about? Like, and I
Mhm.
agree that there's could be something really beautiful or interesting about like how we attach narrative or text or something, messages to the actual flags that like send communication out, which I think could be really beautiful. Um, like I liked the idea of like the self-referential, self-mythological idea of fire attached to like a meteorite that we had before. But I
Uh-huh.
think it would be kind of beautiful to think about, like that's just like one option. There's so many things that we could so easily just attach to these things and send in communication.